This is eternal human spirit, where every story proves why humanity never breaks.
The hunt begins. The galaxy had always seen humans as weak, fragile, and unworthy of respect. To most alien species, humans were nothing more than prey to be hunted. The stronger races treated the hunt like sport, capturing humans for games, chasing them across forests, deserts, and ruined cities. To the hunters, it was entertainment. To humanity, it was terror. On the burned colony of Aryan 3, the hunt had begun again. The skies were filled with smoke, the ground broken with fire, and the screams of families had already faded into silence among the ruins of shattered homes and broken streets. Only one human survivor remained. His name was not important to the hunters. To them, he was just the last prey. But to himself, he was more than that. He was the last breath of his people. He crouched in the shadows of a collapsed building, his body covered in ash and blood. His ribs ached with every breath, but he forced himself to stay quiet. Outside, he could hear the alien hunters, their heavy claws scratching the stone, their voices growling in a language full of cruel laughter. They were searching for him. They believed it was only a matter of time before he would be cornered like an animal. The survivor pressed his hand against the wall, feeling the cracks, feeling the dust. He closed his eyes for a moment, and the memories came. He remembered the night his colony was attacked, the sound of ships tearing through the sky, the way the ground shook when alien soldiers landed. He remembered his mother's voice screaming for him to run, his father's arms shielding him for one final time. Then the fire. Then the silence. He opened his eyes, and the silence around him was broken by a sudden sound. A deep growl echoed through the ruins. The hunters were close. They had picked up his scent again. The survivor's heart pounded, his hands trembled, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. He knew one mistake, one sound, and he would die. The aliens spoke again, their words echoing like thunder. "The last one is near. We will drag him out," they laughed, cruel and confident. To them, it was not a battle. It was a game. They had the power, the weapons, the numbers. He had nothing but his will, but will was enough. The survivor looked down at the broken piece of metal he had picked up earlier. It was sharp on one end, a piece of debris from the burning colony walls. In his hands it felt heavy, but also alive. He held it tight, whispering to himself, "I am not prey." He crawled forward through the rubble, his knees scraping against stone. He moved like a shadow, each breath timed with the wind. The hunters' footsteps grew louder, closer. They believed they had already won. They believed humans had no fight left. Then one of them stepped into the ruins. Its massive frame blocked the dim light. Its eyes glowed like fire, and its claws clicked against the stone. The survivor froze, every muscle stiff. The alien sniffed the air, its voice low. "I smell him." The survivor's heart thundered. He thought of his people, his family, his friends. He thought of how they died and how he was the only one left. He refused to let their memory be erased. He refused to let the aliens laugh over his broken body. The alien stepped closer, lifting its weapon. It was almost smiling. The survivor waited, his body tense like a spring. He waited until the alien leaned forward, until it lowered its guard for one careless second. Then he struck. The sharp metal piece slashed across the alien's leg. The hunter roared in shock, stumbling backward. It had never expected the prey to fight. The survivor did not wait. He threw a stone at its face, the sound echoing through the ruins. Other hunters roared in response. Their voices grew closer, footsteps shaking the ground. The survivor ran deeper into the ruins, his lungs burning, his wounds aching. But for the first time since the attack began, he felt something he had not felt in days: hope. He knew he could not fight them all yet. He knew he was weak, wounded, and alone. But he had drawn blood. He had reminded the hunters that humans were not only prey, Somewhere deep inside him, a fire lit. It whispered that this was not the end. This was the beginning. As the hunters spread out to trap him, their laughter filling the air again, the survivor hid in the darkness of a broken tunnel. His breath was slow, his mind sharp. He watched them carefully. He was no longer just running. He was learning. The night on Aryan 3 was filled with fire and shadows. The hunters thought the game was theirs. They believed the last human would die before sunrise. But in the silence of the ruins, the survivor made a silent promise. He would not die as prey. He would rise as something else, and when the galaxy heard his story, they would never laugh at humanity again. Memories of fire. The ruins of Aryan 3 were silent except for the low growls of the alien hunters. Their claws scraped against the broken stones as they searched, their voices echoing with cruel amusement. They had lost one of their own to a strike. From the survivor. But to them, it was nothing more than a small wound in a game they thought they still controlled. To the survivor, however, it was everything. It was proof that the hunters could bleed, proof that humans could strike back. As he hid in the darkness of the collapsed tunnel, his heart beat slower now, not with fear, but with a strange calmness. He pressed his back against the cold stone, closing his eyes for just a moment. In that silence, memories flooded his mind like fire. He remembered the night the sky had burned. The colony had lived in peace, far from the central trade routes of the galaxy. Humans had built homes on Aryan 3, planted fields, raised children. The stars had felt safe above them, and they had believed the galaxy had finally forgotten about them. But the hunters had not forgotten. To them, humans were entertainment. Prey to be chased, trophies to be displayed. It began with a scream in the night, then the thunder of ships breaking through the atmosphere. Flames spread across the fields, the ground shaking as alien pods smashed into the soil. The survivor had been with his younger sister when the attack began. He had grabbed her hand, running through the streets as people cried for help. Behind them, he could hear the hunters, their voices cold and mocking. "Run, little prey, run faster." He remembered the way his father had stood at the entrance of their home, weapon in hand, refusing to bow. His father had shouted for them. To keep running, his mother had pulled his sister away, tears in her eyes. The last thing he remembered before the blast took them was his father's voice roaring like thunder, not in fear, but in defiance. The survivor's chest tightened as he remembered the moment the fire swallowed everything. He had been thrown to the ground, the heat burning his skin. His ears rang with silence as the world collapsed. When he woke, the colony was ash. His parents gone, his sister gone, his people gone. He was the last. Opening his eyes now, he forced the tears back. There was no time for grief. The hunters moved closer, their shadows dancing against the tunnel walls. He could hear their laughter, their cruel words. The last one hides. He remembers the fire. He knows we will take him soon. But they did not know the fire inside him. The survivor tightened his grip on the shard of metal, his only weapon. He touched the scars on his arms, each one a memory of pain. Each scar reminded him that he had survived what no one else had. If he could survive the fire, he could survive the hunt. He would not let his family's sacrifice be meaningless. He crawled deeper into the tunnel, finding a corner where the light from the outside could not reach. His mind worked quickly, replaying every sound he had heard during the attack, every step of the hunters, every command from their leader, every mistake they had made. He realized something. They had not expected resistance, not from humans, not ever. The thought grew stronger in his mind. If they did not expect him to fight, then he could use that against them. They were hunters who believed themselves superior, arrogant in their power. They saw humans as mindless prey, but he would show them that prey could think, prey could plan, prey could strike. The survivor's breathing slowed as he waded in. Silence. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, his ears sharp to every sound. He could hear two hunters moving close, their claws dragging along the walls as they sniffed the air. One of them growled. "The scent is stronger here." The survivor's heart pounded, but he stayed still. He remembered his father's voice. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to fight even when fear surrounds you. He held on to those words like a shield. When the first hunter stepped into the tunnel, its massive frame scraping the walls, the survivor did not move. He waited until the second hunter entered, its glowing eyes searching the shadows. Then he reached for a stone on the ground and tossed it to the far side of the tunnel. The sound echoed loudly. The hunters turned their heads sharply, their attention drawn away for a moment. That was his chance. He lunged forward, his shard of metal slashing across the nearest hunter's arm. The creature roared, its weapon clattering to the ground. The survivor grabbed it in desperation, though it was heavy in his hands. With every ounce of strength, he pulled the trigger. A flash of light filled the tunnel, striking the second hunter in the chest. Smoke filled the air as both hunters fell. The survivor dropped the weapon, his body trembling. He stared at the alien corpses, his breath sharp and uneven. He had killed two of them, not with strength, but with mind and courage. For the first time since the fire, he felt his father's presence, not as a memory of loss, but as a voice telling him he had done what was right. He whispered to the silence, "I will fight. I will not let them take everything." But outside the tunnel, more voices rose. The hunters had heard the roars of their fallen brothers. They were coming, faster and more furious than before. The ground trembled under their steps. The air filled with the sound of weapons being drawn. The survivor looked at the weapon in his hands, heavy and strange. His body ached, his wounds burned, but his spirit did not bend. He was no longer just a boy from Aryan 3, no longer just prey. He was something new, something the hunters had never expected, and as the fire of memory burned in his heart, he prepared for the storm that was about to fall upon him. Turning the trap. The night air of Aryan 3 was thick with smoke and the smell of burned stone. The survivor crouched in the shadows of the tunnel, his hands trembling as he gripped the alien weapon. His arms shook under its weight, his body aching from wounds, but his eyes held a new light. He had killed, not once but twice, and for the first time the hunters had felt fear, even if it was small. Even if they denied it with their cruel laughter, he knew they felt it. The ground outside shook as more hunters gathered. Their growls echoed across the ruins, calling for blood. They were angry. They were insulted. To lose even one of their pack to a human was shame. To lose two was humiliation. The survivor could hear their leader's voice cutting through the noise, deep and commanding. "Do not play anymore. Find him and end him. This hunt must not become a story for others to hear." The survivor listened, his mind racing. He knew he could not face them head-on. They were stronger, faster, armed with technology far beyond his understanding. If he fought them directly, he would die quickly. But if he thought like prey no longer, if he thought like a hunter, then perhaps he had a chance. He crawled back into the ruins, leaving the bodies of the fallen behind. He studied the collapsed buildings, the broken walls, the shattered towers that leaned like skeletons against the blackened sky. Every corner, every broken pipe, every shattered beam could be turned into a weapon. The hunters believed they owned the battlefield, but he knew the ruins better than they did. It had been his home, and now it would become his trap. Moving quietly, he searched the rubble for anything he could use. He found sharp glass melted by fire, metal rods bent from explosions, wires torn from old machines. He carried what he could and placed them carefully. His hands worked with speed but also precision. He remembered how his father used to set traps when hunting animals back on Earth. Pits covered with leaves, lines tied to branches, snares hidden in the grass. The hunters had mocked humanity as primitive, but those same lessons would now be their downfall. The survivor tied wires across a broken hallway hidden under ash. He placed shards of glass along the shadows where footsteps would fall. He dragged a heavy piece of stone high above on a cracked beam, balancing it carefully with rubble. If anyone passed under, one small push would send it crashing down. Each trap was simple, but together they could slow even the strongest beast. His heart pounded as he worked, every sound of claws scratching nearby reminding him of the danger. Twice he froze as hunters passed close, their glowing eyes scanning the ruins, but his body melted into the darkness, unmoving. His breath was steady, his will unshaken. Finally, the moment came. The first hunter entered the hallway where wires stretched low. Its heavy boots caught the line, and in an instant, sharp glass pierced its leg. The creature roared in pain, stumbling backward before it could rise again. The survivor pushed the cracked beam, and the heavy stone fell, smashing into the alien's skull. The sound echoed like thunder. The hunter lay silent, its blood staining the ground. The survivor's chest heaved with both fear and triumph. He had turned the ruins into a weapon. He had turned their arrogance into weakness. He whispered to himself again, "I am not prey." But the hunters were many, and the roar of another came quickly. A second hunter charged through the ruins, its eyes burning with fury. The survivor fled into the shadows, leading it toward another trap. He slipped through a narrow passage where he had placed metal shards. Sticking out from the wall, the alien, larger and less cautious, rushed straight through. Its arm was torn open, blood spraying across the rubble. It roared in rage and swung its weapon wildly, blasting fire into the darkness. The survivor dove behind a broken column, heat searing his skin. He grabbed a piece of debris and hurled it to the far corner. The alien followed the noise, stomping straight into another trap. This time, the survivor pulled on a rope he had tied earlier, sending a pile of jagged rubble crashing down from above. The alien's scream cut the night before silence returned. Breathing heavily, the survivor looked at the broken weapon on the ground. He could barely believe what he had done. He had slain 4 hunters, not in direct combat but by using the ruins. By using his mind, he realized the truth. He could not match their strength, but he could outthink them. He could fight not as prey, not even as a soldier, but as something they never imagined. The cries of the remaining hunters grew louder. Their leader's voice roared above them all. "He is not prey, he is a poison. End him now before the others hear of this." The survivor felt a chill. The words told him more than he expected. The hunters feared not just losing him, they feared the story. They feared that if word spread that a human had killed them, the galaxy would laugh at them. The entire system of power and fear they had built would crack. And in that moment, he understood something deeper. He was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting for the memory of his people. For all of humanity scattered across the stars, he crouched low, his eyes sharp, his body weak, but his spirit burning. He had become more than just a survivor. He had become the trap itself. He was turning their game against them. And as the night stretched on and the hunters closed in, he was no longer running to escape. He was waiting to strike. The ruins of Aryan 3 had become his hunting ground. The hunters had become his prey, the survivor's message. The ruins of Aryan 3 trembled with the rage of the hunters. They were no longer laughing, no longer mocking. Their cruel amusement had turned into fury and fear. For the first time in the history of their hunts, prey had fought back and claimed their lives. To them, it was an insult. To the survivor, it was the first sign of change. He crouched inside the broken husk of an old communications tower. Its walls cracked and its machines burned. The air smelled of melted wires and smoke. Once, this tower had carried the voices of the colony across the stars. Now it was nothing but wreckage. But in wreckage, the survivor saw possibility. If the hunters feared the story of one human survivor, then he would make sure that story spread. His hands trembled as he searched through the burnt panels and shattered screens. He pulled at wires, connecting and twisting them together. His father had once taught him how to repair old radios on Earth. It had seemed like a useless skill in a galaxy of advanced technology, but in that moment it became his weapon. He worked quickly, his ears sharp for the sounds of hunters outside. Every snap of stone, every growl in the distance reminded him of how close death was, yet his hands moved with purpose. At last, sparks jumped from the console. A faint hum rose from the broken transmitter. It was weak, unstable, but alive. The survivor leaned close, pressing his lips near the crackling microphone. His voice was low but steady. "This is not prey speaking," he whispered. "This is human." He paused, his throat tight. He thought of his parents, his sister, his people. He thought of the fire that had taken them, the claws that had hunted them. He thought of the blood he had already spilled. Then he spoke again, louder, his words filled with fire. "They hunt us like animals, they believe. We are weak, but they are wrong. I am still here, I am still alive, and I will not die as prey." His words traveled through the broken transmitter, carried as static across channels he could not even name. He did not know who would hear. He only knew someone must. His voice grew stronger. "Humans are not prey. Humans are hunters too. And if I must fight until my last breath, then let the galaxy hear this. We are not afraid." The tower shook suddenly as a blast struck its walls. The hunters had found him. Their leader's roar thundered through the ruins. "Silence him!" The survivor gritted his teeth. He kept speaking even as dust fell from the ceiling. "To any who can hear me, know this. I am only one, but I am not alone. Humanity will rise. Humanity will fight. The stars will remember us." The doors of the tower burst open. 3 hunters stormed inside, their glowing eyes filled with rage. The survivor threw himself behind the console as claws ripped through the air. Sparks exploded. Fire licked the walls. He grabbed a shard of metal and swung with desperation, cutting across one alien's face. The creature roared, stumbling backward. The other 2 advanced, weapons raised. But before they could strike, the damaged transmitter flared. Static filled the air, and the survivor's words echoed again through the comms. His voice carried into the dark sky. "We are not prey. We are the storm." The hunters froze for a moment, as if those words struck. Deeper than the blade, it was enough. The survivor hurled a broken pipe at the controls. Sparks exploded into flame. Smoke filled the tower. The hunters cursed, clawing through the fire, but the survivor slipped into the shadows through a crack in the wall, coughing but alive. Outside, the night sky seemed darker, yet the survivor felt lighter. His message was out there, drifting like an ember into the void. Maybe no one would hear, or maybe it would be lost in the static of the stars, but maybe, just maybe, someone would. He ran across the ruins, his lungs burning, his wounds bleeding. Behind him, the hunters roared in frustration. They had nearly captured him, but he had escaped again. Worse for them, he had spoken. His words had escaped their control. If even one other human, even one distant ship had heard him, then their empire of fear had cracked. The survivor crouched beneath a fallen tower, breathing hard. He knew they would hunt harder now. They would not stop until he was dead. Yet, for the first time since the attack began, he did not feel alone. Somewhere across the stars, his voice might be reaching others. His people might hear, or other races might whisper that humans were not what they seemed. He touched the shard of metal still in his hand. His reflection glimmered faintly in its edge. His face was bruised and scarred, his eyes sunken, but there was fire in them. He whispered to himself, "They will remember this. They will remember me." The hunters howled in the distance, their shadows stretching across the ruins. They were furious, not only because of the deaths he had caused, but because of the story. They feared the idea of prey becoming predator. They feared the idea of humans refusing to bow. The survivor rose slowly, his body trembling but his spirit unbroken. He moved deeper into the ruins, already planning the next strike. He had set traps before, but now his mind raced with more. He would bleed them, break them, turn their own arrogance against them again and again. Until his body gave out, he would not stop. And somewhere in the cold void above Aryan 3, a faint signal traveled, weak but steady, carrying the words of one human survivor into the endless night. It was a message not only of defiance but of warning, a message that prey could fight back, a message that prey could change the fate of the stars, the rising fear. The hunters had always believed themselves untouchable. For generations they had crossed the stars and chosen their prey at will. To them, humans were fragile animals meant to be chased, mocked, and destroyed. Never once had they imagined that a single human could wound them. Never once had they considered that prey could turn on the predator. But now, in the ashes of Aryan 3, their arrogance was breaking. The leader of the hunters stood in the center of the ruins, his towering frame outlined by the burning sky. His claws dripped with the blood of those already slain. His armor glowed. With heat, around him the remaining pack gathered, growling in low voices. Their laughter was gone, replaced by unease. They spoke to one another in whispers, their glowing eyes darting to the shadows. Every sound, every flicker of movement made them tense. They had begun to fear the darkness, because somewhere in that darkness the survivor watched. The survivor moved silently among the ruins, every step measured, every breath controlled. His body was weak and scarred, but his spirit burned hotter than fire. He had killed, he had sent a message, and now the hunters knew his name, not the one his parents had given him, but the name that echoed in their minds. The survivor. They spat it with hatred, but behind the hatred was something they had never felt before: fear. He hid high above in the shattered remains of a tower, staring down at them as they argued. The leader roared, demanding silence. He is one, we are many. He bleeds as any prey bleeds, and this now before his words spread further. But the pack shifted uneasily. They had lost too many, too quickly. One hunter muttered that the prey fought like them. Another growled that the prey set traps like a shadow. They did not want to admit it, but they were afraid. The survivor could see it, and the sight gave him strength. He knew he could not win by strength alone, but he could win by fear. Fear was a weapon sharper than claws, deadlier than blades. He remembered how hunters on Earth once used fear to control animals, to drive them where they wanted. Now he would use the same against those who thought themselves gods. When night fell, he struck again, not to kill, but to terrify. He moved through the ruins like a ghost, whispering through broken speakers, making sounds echo from tunnels, throwing stones into the dark. The hunters fired wildly into shadows, their blasts lighting the ruins like storms, but they hit nothing. They shouted curses, but their voices cracked with unease. The survivor placed symbols on the walls with the blood of the fallen, crude marks that told a story. He painted a circle with 3 lines crossing through it, the mark of defiance. Each time the hunters turned a corner, they saw it, glowing faintly in firelight. They began to whisper that the prey had become something else, that perhaps a spirit haunted the ruins. He set more traps, not always to kill, but to wound. A spike of metal through a leg, a hidden pit filled with glass, a falling beam that struck but did not crush. Every injury made the hunters weaker, slower, more afraid. Their howls filled the night, but their pride was bleeding away. The survivor, exhausted and starving, pressed himself against a broken wall, his breath shallow. Yet when he saw them limping, bleeding, Glancing into the shadows with fear in their eyes, he felt stronger. He whispered to himself, "They hunted us like animals, but now they learn how it feels to be prey." The leader tried to keep order. He roared. He struck his own pack when they faltered. He shouted that they were warriors, that no human could defeat them. But even he looked over his shoulder now. His eyes glowed with fury, but behind the fury was doubt. He had promised his people that humans were nothing, and now a single survivor was proving him wrong. Far above the ruins, the stars stretched in endless silence. Somewhere out there, the survivor's message traveled still, across static, across forgotten channels, perhaps already touching the ears of others. The hunters did not know how far his voice had gone, but the thought poisoned them. What if others knew? What if other humans heard? What if the galaxy began to laugh at them instead? The survivor saw it clearly. They were no longer hunting him for sport. They were hunting him to erase the story. They feared not his blade, but his voice. They feared not his body, but the fire. Inside him, in the dead of night, the survivor climbed onto a broken rooftop and stared at the stars. His wounds burned, his stomach ached with hunger, but his eyes did not close. He thought of his parents, of his sister, of all those who had fallen, and he whispered, "You are not gone. You live through me. You live through every strike I make." The hunters howled again, searching through the ruins, but their voices no longer sounded like gods. They sounded like beasts who knew the shadows were no longer theirs, and in that moment, the survivor understood something greater. He was no longer only fighting for himself. He was no longer only running for survival. He was reshaping the battlefield. He was reshaping their fear. He was reshaping the way the galaxy saw humanity. They had come to Aryan 3 to prove that humans were animals, weak and pitiful. Instead, they had created a legend. Instead, they had awakened something that could not be silenced. The survivor clenched his shard of metal tighter, his jaw set. He knew the battles ahead would be harder. He knew they would come, with greater fury. But he also knew the truth. They were afraid now. The hunters feared the hunted, and in the ashes of his world, the first sparks of rebellion were born. The final confrontation. The ruins of Aryan 3 had become a battlefield of shadows, and for days the survivor had turned the hunters' arrogance against them. He had trapped them, wounded them, and spread fear into their hearts. The mighty predators, who once laughed as they chased humans, now walked with caution, their claws dragging slower, their glowing eyes scanning every corner. They whispered among themselves, questioning whether they still hunted a man or a spirit of vengeance. Their leader, however, refused to bend. He could feel the shame growing in his pack, and he knew that if he allowed fear to spread further, his rule would crumble. That night, under the broken sky painted red with fire, he decided to end it with his own hands. The survivor watched from the top of a shattered tower, his body weak but his mind sharp. His ribs ached, his legs were torn, and hunger had carved deep lines into his face. Yet his eyes still burned with fire. He saw the hunters gather below, forming a circle around their leader. The massive alien stood taller than the rest, his armor covered in scars, his voice booming across the ruins. "Enough of this game. The prey defies us. The prey speaks, as though he is greater. Tonight I will silence him. Tonight I will tear out his heart before you all, and when his voice is gone, the stars will remember nothing." The pack roared in approval, but their voices were hollow. The survivor heard their fear beneath the noise, and he knew the truth. The leader was not speaking only to them. He was speaking to himself, for even the leader had begun to feel the weight of doubt. The survivor climbed down from the tower, moving slowly. His body screamed for rest, but he ignored it. He walked into the open ruins where the moonlight shone faintly through the smoke. The hunters turned as one, growls rising, weapons drawn, but the leader raised his hand and silenced them. His glowing eyes locked onto the human. "So you come to me, little prey," he growled. "Do you surrender at last?" The survivor's voice was quiet but steady. "I am not prey." The leader's laughter shook the ground, a deep, cruel sound. "You bleed, you starve, you run. What are you if not prey?" The survivor lifted the shard of metal he had carried since the first night, his hand shaking but firm. "I am the last of my people. I am their voice. I am their fire." The leader snarled and stepped forward, his massive claws glinting in the dim light. The other hunters backed away, forming a ring. They wanted to see blood. They wanted their leader to erase the shame. But inside their glowing eyes flickered something else. Fear of what might happen if he failed. The battle began with a roar. The leader charged, his steps shaking the ruins, his claws slashed down with the strength of thunder. The survivor rolled aside, the blow smashing stone where he had stood. Dust filled the air. The survivor struck with his shard, cutting into the leader's armor. It sparked, but did not break. The alien laughed. "You cannot kill me with scraps." But the survivor was not trying to kill him in one strike. He moved, with the desperation of the hunted but the mind of the hunter. Each time the leader swung, he dodged. Each time claws scraped stone, he slipped away. He slashed at weak points, stabbed at joints, cut where the armor bent. Slowly, the mighty leader began to bleed. The pack howled, some in fury, some in disbelief. They had never seen their leader wounded by human hands. The survivor breathed heavily, his body near collapse, but he pressed on. He thought of his mother's voice, his father's courage, his sister's smile. He thought of the fire that had stolen them, and his spirit blazed brighter. The leader roared and lunged again, this time catching the survivor across the chest. Blood sprayed, pain burned through his body. He fell to the ground, gasping. The leader loomed above him, laughing cruelly. "This is how prey dies," he spat. But the survivor smiled through the blood. His hand reached for a hidden wire he had tied earlier to the rubble. When the leader stepped forward, the wire pulled, tight, dislodging the cracked beam above. With a crash, stone fell upon the alien, smashing into his armor. For the first time, the leader staggered, stunned. The survivor forced himself up. His vision blurred. He charged with the last of his strength. Driving the shard of metal deep into the alien's side, the leader roared in rage, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him high. The pack watched in silence, the firelight reflecting in their eyes. They expected the end, but the survivor, gasping for air, spoke with a voice that cut through the night. "You call us prey, but you will remember this. You will remember that. Even the weakest human can make the strongest hunter bleed." With a final twist, he drove the shard deeper. The leader howled, blood spilling across the ruins. He staggered, dropped the survivor, and fell to his knees. The pack gasped, their confidence shattered. The survivor collapsed, his body broken. But his eyes locked on the leader. The alien leader fell to the ground, his last words a growl. "You are no prey." Then silence claimed him. The hunters stepped back in shock. Their leader was dead. Their prey had killed him. The ruins were silent except for the ragged breaths of the survivor. He knelt in the ashes, his hands covered in blood, his voice soft but unyielding. "We are not prey." The hunters looked at him, not with laughter, not with scorn, but with fear. And in that fear, the survivor saw victory. He had done more than kill their leader. He had shattered the illusion of their power. He had broken the chains of fear they had wrapped around. Humanity. The survivor fell back against the ruins, his chest heaving. His body was nearly finished, but his spirit stood unbroken. He had fought the final battle, and though his blood soaked the stones, his defiance burned brighter than ever. The galaxy would remember this night. The hunters would whisper of it in shame, and across the stars, the name of humanity would no longer be spoken as prey, but as something to be feared. The fate of the stars. The ruins of Arian 3 were silent at last. The fire had died down to embers, and the night was heavy with the stench of blood and ash. The great leader of the hunters lay broken among shattered stone, his body still, his glowing eyes dimmed forever. Around him, the pack of hunters stood frozen, their claws hanging at their sides. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they did not cheer in victory. They did not laugh at the fall of their prey. Instead, they stared in disbelief, their pride shattered, their fear spreading like wildfire through their veins. The survivor leaned against the ruins, his chest heaving. His body was broken, wounds carved deep into his skin, and every breath felt like knives cutting through his ribs, yet his spirit still burned. His hands shook as he pressed the shard of metal against the ground, using it to keep himself upright. His voice, cracked and weak, still carried strength. "You thought we were animals. You thought we were weak. But look at me. Look at what one human has done." The hunters shifted uneasily. Their leader's death was not just a loss of power. It was a wound to their pride. To be defeated by prey, to be outwitted, trapped, and bled by a single survivor. It was unthinkable. They looked at each other in silence, and for the first time, none of them dared to move closer. They had strength, they had weapons, but they no longer had certainty. They no longer had control. The balance of fear had shifted. The survivor raised his head toward the dark sky. His eyes were glazed with exhaustion, but above him the stars seemed brighter. He thought of his people, of Arian 3 before the fire, of the laughter of children in the streets, the voices of his parents, the smile of his sister. He thought of how they were taken and how he alone remained. He whispered softly, "I am not alone. You live through me. You live through this fight." Unseen by him, his message from the broken tower had already traveled. It drifted across channels, across static, carried like a ghost through the endless void. Somewhere on distant colonies, human ears began to hear it. A whisper of survival, a whisper of defiance. We are not prey. On faraway ships, alien traders caught fragments of the signal. Their eyes widened, their whispers spread. Could it be true? Had humans fought back? Had a single survivor defied the hunters? The story began to grow, carried faster than light by fear and curiosity. Back in the ruins, the hunters growled in frustration. They wanted to kill him, to erase him, but none moved. Their leader's body was still at their feet, a silent reminder that arrogance had cost them dearly. They whispered among themselves, their voices shaking. Some spoke of retreat, some spoke of revenge, but none dared step forward. They had already seen too much. They had already felt fear. The survivor sank to his knees, his strength fading, yet his spirit rose higher than ever. He had no army, no allies, no weapons but scraps and courage. But he had changed something greater than the ruins around him. He had changed the story, and stories were stronger than blades. He looked at the hunters, his voice low but sharp. "You came here to hunt, you came here to laugh, but you will leave with silence. You will leave knowing that even one human can break you, and if one can do this, imagine what all of us can do." The hunters lowered their eyes, ashamed and furious. They dragged their leader's body away into the night, their growls fading into the shadows. They had come to Arian 3 to prove dominance, but they left with fear carved into their souls. They left knowing they could bleed. They left knowing the galaxy would hear of this. The survivor fell back against the ruins, the shard of metal still clutched in his hand. His body trembled, his vision blurred. He knew he might not live to see another dawn, but he smiled. His people were gone, yet their spirit was alive, carried through him, carried through his words, carried through the stars. Above him, the sky stretched wide and endless. The stars glimmered faintly, silent witnesses to his defiance. Somewhere out there, Humanity still lived, scattered, broken, hiding in corners of the galaxy, and somewhere out there, they would hear his story. His defiance would give them strength. His voice would remind them of who they were. He whispered to the stars, his voice, soft but unyielding. "This is not the end. This is the beginning. They hunted us like animals, but we are not prey. We are the fire that will rise again. We are the storm they cannot silence. And when the galaxy remembers us, they will remember." This night, the Night One survivor changed the fate of the stars. His eyes closed slowly, his body giving in to exhaustion, but his spirit had already traveled beyond the ruins, beyond Arian 3. His message lived, and nothing could erase it. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. The hunters had tried to break his kind, but instead they had created a legend, and legends do not die.
Thank you for joining Eternal Human Spirit, where humanity always rises again.